Just a couple of quick announcements.
Well, now not so much.
Pardon?
Keep
Not
going.
so much.
It's okay, leave that. I just turned up the volume.
Can you
Okay.
lower it?
Is this okay? Sounds good. I can hear myself. You know, next week we're having a trip to Wilmot Gardens, and there's a sign-up sheet in the back. If you haven't signed up at this point, sign up right after class, and then Julianne and I will tell you more about the trip at that point. So if you could stay for a few minutes right after class. And here's Roy Hunt, and I have an announcement that tomorrow, I guess it is, right? Roy, you are running the Wonder, which is at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And it's going to be a program about Grow Hub, and David will be here to talk about it. And it's really a good follow-up, I think, on what Leah is talking about today. So that being said, and I do have to read Jill, excuse me, but today we are very privileged to have someone here who will be talking to us about therapeutic horticulture and Wilmot. Leah Diehl is the director of therapeutic horticulture at Wilmot Botanical Garden. And she's also a lecturer in the environmental horticulture department at the university. She is a very busy woman. Trust me, I know that. She is a licensed landscape architect, a master gardener, and a professionally registered horticultural therapist. She manages and teaches an undergraduate certificate program in horticultural therapy at the university. She conducts research and runs therapeutic horticulture programming for diverse populations, where she coordinates the clients, the students, and the volunteers. It's quite a program, and it's run out of the greenhouse, which is right there at home. Leah began her work in horticultural therapy in Chicago in 1993. You must have been very young then.
Very young.
And has given lectures and workshops and training on horticultural therapy, healing gardens, and related topics to many groups in the U.S. and abroad. On top of all of this, she also serves as a consultant with the Center for Urban Greenery and Ecology of the National Parks Board in Singapore, where she oversees the development of horticultural therapy, programming, research, and education. So I think we were very privileged to have her. So without further introduction, I would to have Leah come up here and talk with us.
I'll put my coffee cup down there. Well, good morning. How are you all today? Good. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to move around too much. I'm kind of a jester, but hopefully I'll keep focus on the sound here. How many of you all have been to Wilmot Gardens? Oh, good. Okay. And many of you will go again next week. That's great. So some of this will make you familiar in terms of the images and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Let me just hide this.
Actually, there were, oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of Wilmot Gardens. I know Dr. Tischer will give you some more information on that next time, but I think it's really important to understand the history in order to really understand where the concept of this therapeutic horticulture program came from. So if you've been to Wilmot, you may have seen our historical marker out there. This talks a little bit about the history of the gardens, but I'm just going to kind of tell you a little bit about it. These gardens were in part developed by Royal Wilmot, Royal James Wilmot, they called him Roy, which is why it's now called Wilmot Gardens. He was a horticulturist at UF back in the 40s. He's here with his dog Ginger. We think these pictures are in what was Wilmot Gardens now. I'm not entirely sure, but he was a very well-known horticulturist at UF. He was an expert on camellias and involved in camellia culture, camellia care, classifying all the different camellias at the time. Here's a couple of pictures of some bulletins when he was at the experiment station, which is what they called it then. You can see one is camellia culture, the other is camellia growing. If you look at the date in the upper right of these two, you'll see it's 1944, so quite some time ago. This is what the area looked like back then, somewhat. You can kind of see that it's very rural. Actually, Wilmot would be, the gardens would be kind of down here. When I first saw this picture, I was sure that that building was our conference center building. You've seen it, but I've been told that in fact, that's not the case, and that the gardens would be kind of down in this area. But we're gonna come back to this picture in a little bit. I just want you to have a sense of what that would have looked like. I believe this picture was taken in 1950 or right around that time. So very rural. Unfortunately, Roy died kind of unexpectedly at an early age. It was about 1952, I believe. And so at that time, the gardens were named in his honor. This is his wife unveiling the monument that was created to honor him in the garden. That does still stand in our garden today. And at that time, because he was so well known in the camellia world, countries from all over the world sent camellias to the gardens in his honor to be planted. From Japan and France, England, they came from everywhere. So it was really a wonderful thing. And these gardens were really important, not just for the University of Florida, but in the life of the community. People would come here on the weekends, they would have picnics with their families. Many people got married in these gardens. They really were beautiful and very well used. And I believe this picture is from 1952. Unfortunately, sometime in the 1970s, the university decided to stop actively maintaining the gardens. Apparently budgets were tight, and this is one of the things they cut. You guys are from Florida, you know, if you stop maintaining any kind of green and growing space, it's going to get out of control. And that's exactly what happened. A lot of invasives came in, vines. We had a pine bark beetle infestation that killed a lot of the overstory pines, and then back-to-back hurricane seasons not too long later knocked over many of those pines. And it was just a disaster. I was not in Gainesville at that time, so I never got to see it with my own eyes, but I've seen lots of pictures, and you can see it was barely navigable. You couldn't really even walk through it anymore. Another picture here. Well, this is where Dr. Tischer, we will meet next week if you go to Wilmot, really comes into the picture. Dr. Tischer was the dean of the College of Medicine, and he talks about how he drove past this space every day for 25 years. And always thought to himself, gosh, if we don't do something with that, the university is going to turn that into a parking lot or another building. So when he retired, he asked for permission to restore the gardens. This was about 2006. They were under the auspices of the College of Medicine, still are, and so they gave him permission. He put together a very small but very dedicated group of many master gardeners who came out on the weekends to start trying to restore these gardens. They pulled out some 80 fallen trees, lots of invasives and vines, and just very slowly started to turn the gardens around. Some pictures, students groups got involved as well, and this was an act of love because it was not easy. They found the original marker that was in Roy Wilmot's name. It was, you know, a little bit beat up, but that's since been kind of restored. They also found that there were some of the original camellias and azaleas still under all that mess. They expect that some of them may have been relocated to other yards in the Gainesville area. Can't say I blame them. People probably saw, you know, oh my gosh, that camellia is going to die, and perhaps under the cover of darkness came and died. So anyway, that's okay as long as they're still living somewhere. But they did find, I believe it was about 60 or 80 of the original camellias and azaleas. And I know, I wish this wasn't such a blurry picture, but this actually says on it 1948. So one of them had been actually planted in 1948 and was still alive. And we do have a few of those still in there. So the work continues. It never feels quite done, but at this point, really what we're doing is battling a few invasives left, of course, weeding, who doesn't weed when they have a garden, and just adding to the garden. So they just did a phenomenal job. There are a lot of beautiful spaces in the gardens. We have some more cultivated areas. We have some more natural areas, lots of sun, lots of shade, depending where you are. A lot of brick and concrete pathways through the garden. So much of it is accessible for wheelchairs and walkers and strollers. You can see the greenhouse in the background. This area in the foreground is what we call our lifestyles track, because they're at some time, again, before my time, they had a research project on seniors and walking. And so they installed this track, which is still there, but what's really nice is we've turned it into kind of a butterfly garden, a wildflower garden. So you can walk around it and see the center, and there's a sitting area. We also just recently installed a sundial in honor of somebody that participated back there for the horticulture program. We also were really fortunate to get a donation of about 40 Japanese maple trees from a doctor. He was the department chair of urology and was moving on to another position in another town and donated these. So we actually transplanted them, which if you know anything about Japanese maples, that's not the easiest thing to do. We did lose some of them over the last few years, but many of them are still there, and it's a beautiful walk. In here, we built this archway to thank him. So in 2008, the city of Gainesville honored Wilmot with this historical marker. We hope that that means that nobody's going to try to touch the land, but you never know. I guess there's not a guarantee. But this is Dr. Tischer on the left here during the ceremony for that, when that happened. So remember I showed you this picture, what this looked like back in the 50s, and I told you that Wilmot Gardens was kind of down in this area. Well, this is what it looks like today. So much of this may be familiar to you, but we've got Shands Hospital here, the VA hospital, the Davis Cancer Pavilion and Shands Medical Plaza. This is Wilmot Gardens right here. And actually now there's another building over here that's not even there in that picture, the Translational Science Building. So Wilmot is literally a green island, surrounded by all sorts of big buildings where big business is going on, procedures, medical care, research, lots of kinds of things, many of which are somewhat stressful places, whether you're a patient or a family member, or you're a doctor or a nurse or a researcher. So what was really interesting is that they found that as they were restoring the gardens, the intent was to heal the land and restore the gardens so that they could be used again. The volunteers that were involved were also going through a sense of restoration. They were feeling the positive effects of nature and working out there and being in there. And then as the gardens were opening up again and people could actually visit, they were finding that all the people coming to visit were also kind of having that healing experience or that restorative experience. And we hear every single day how people are so thankful that these gardens are there, especially patients, their families, because rather than sitting in a waiting room or sitting in McDonald's waiting for their next appointment, they can come out and walk the gardens or sit in a bench in the shade somewhere. And that's really helps with stress restoration. Excuse me. So it only seemed natural to take the next step in the life of this garden, and that was to make this healing concept more intentional. So that was when I came on board to start the therapeutic horticulture program, and it kind of came about through a grant that we were working on. We were a finalist for the grant, but didn't end up getting the grant. But in that, it was a really big grant with a big group of people involved. And in the process of working through that whole thing, we started to realize that this was really a perfect place for therapeutic horticulture. I was involved with the development of that grant, just kind of as a volunteer. And so everybody said, even if we don't get this grant, I think we should try to start a therapeutic horticulture program for some of the patients and the community members. So we did that. As I said, we didn't end up getting the grant, but it did launch the program. So I'm very thankful that we went through that process. The first group that we started with was a group of veterans with mental health issues. They were already doing a arts program at Wilmot, and we've got that little conference center there. And so they were familiar with the space, and we said, hey, you guys interested in learning about horticulture too? And they said yes, or at least their leaders said yes. And so we didn't have a greenhouse at that time. We borrowed some space from the environmental horticulture, and I was not yet faculty over there. They were very supportive of what we were doing. They let us use their potting shed to hold our activities. They actually gave us some greenhouse bench space and one of their greenhouses to grow our plants. And so we just met this group once a week. We had several master gardeners that I put through a special training before we started the program, so they kind of know what the program was all about. And it was a really great experience. When we first started working with these veterans, they were, many of them have bipolar disorder. They were very quiet, not a lot of facial expression, very flat affect. They would not talk a whole lot. They would, listen, but not move a whole lot. And so we developed some goals for the group, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about how that works with therapeutic horticulture, but we wanted them socializing a little bit. We wanted them moving a little bit and just kind of engaging. And it took a while, but we, over time, found that we were starting to see some smiles and we were starting to hear a little bit more conversation back. And so that was really great to see. And I think it was also great for my trained volunteers to see that this process can actually make a difference. So with this group, we were doing some very basic kinds of things like plant propagation. Here they're dividing up Transcantia and seed planting and some really kind of basic horticultural activities. Well, not long after we started that group, we received, at the time, it was an anonymous donation of $500,000 to build the greenhouse. And that was due to Dr. Tischer's work with a donor that he knew well. And that was unbelievably amazing. I will never forget that phone call when they told me that happened. So with that donation, in combination with a few other smaller donations and some in-kind contributions for some contractors that were working nearby anyway, already, we were able to build this beautiful greenhouse. And it is, as you can see, and hopefully when you visit, you'll walk through it. It's a conservatory style greenhouse. We wanted to make sure that it added to the beauty of the garden, didn't take away. So although a polycarbonate greenhouse would have been a lot less expensive, it would also have been kind of an eyesore there. So it's glass, which again is beautiful, but not the easiest to work in at all times. As you know, a little more difficult to control the temperature. But we also have this beautiful head house in the front. That's where my office is. We have a reception area with bathrooms. It's really an amazing space. And it sits in the southwest corner of the gardens. We designed the greenhouse to be accessible for everybody, whether you used a scooter or a walker or whatever that might be. So it's the greenhouse, the growing space itself is about 2,700 square feet. I guess that includes our storage room as well. But we created some wide open aisles. The entire floor is concrete. It slopes gently to both sides so that water never sits around and kind of drains quite easily. I mentioned we've got 2 bathrooms in there, both of which are accessible. And we also, I think I've got a picture here. Yeah, we worked with, so back up here for a second. I don't know if any of you have familiarity with greenhouse benches. And when I say benches, I mean these tables. Typically in a production greenhouse, the tops float side to side so that you can increase your production space and decrease your walking space. You can kind of push 2 together when you want to get down the middle. And so I had always thought, wouldn't it be great? Because that's great for somebody in a wheelchair because you can, pull it toward them and they can sit head on because the legs are farther on the other side. But if you don't have the exact right size wheelchair, you might not be able to get under that bench. So I kind of casually said to Dr. Tischer one day, wouldn't it be great if these didn't only move side to side, but they also moved up and down? I'd never seen a greenhouse like that or a bench. And he said, I think we can make that work. So he got in touch with the mechanical engineering students at UF and they redesigned. I know that doesn't look like much, but it's like the Cadillac of greenhouse benches. So this is a crank system that we can raise or lower these benches. We've got about a 12-inch differential. I can even accommodate, I had a woman, actually she was in the last picture, who drove a scooter and we could get the whole front end of that scooter under the table so she can work in a really comfortable position. So that was great. And it also just helps for somebody standing because you can raise that table and you're not having to bend, put pressure on your lower back. So the greenhouse is really beautiful. We grow a lot of variety of plants in there. It kind of depends on the season, but one of our goals is to have a program that's very engaging for people. So we're always experimenting and trying with different kinds of plants and sort of seeing what we can do. Obviously, when you have a beautiful greenhouse like this and you're trying to put together a therapeutic horticulture program, then plant propagation and plant activities are at the core of that. And that's certainly the case for us. So thinking about what are all the different kinds of horticulture activities that we can make therapeutic, and I'll kind of explain that process in a minute. These are some of the groups that we have worked with over the years. We opened our doors in the greenhouse in 2014. And of course, once we had our own space, we could develop, we could add a lot more groups. I will say, however, that the university in 2018, I became a faculty member. Half of my job is to run this program, and then the other half of my job was to develop and now teach and manage the horticultural therapy certificate at UF. And so the university supports us in that way, but they don't provide any money for us to run these programs. They also don't provide funding to take care of the gardens. So everything we do in the therapeutic horticulture program and also in the gardens, we have to fundraise for. So that's a pretty important component. I'm sure Dr. Tisha will talk a little bit more about that next week. That fundraising is a pretty important part of what we do. I'm not the best with asking people for money, but I can write grants. So that's kind of my part, as I write a lot of grants and try to drum up some money. And all of these groups have been based on either a donation. For example, we had a wonderful family who donated money toward working with veterans. Some of these are programs because a department at UF helped, for example, the adults with movement disorders. It was the neurology department, Dr. Oken, who gave us some money to try that group out. But many of these are based on grants that we received. So what I thought I would do is just tell you a little bit about some of the groups that we've worked with and kind of help understand what therapeutic horticulture is really about. So one of the very first grants we got was to work, it was from Dialysis Center Incorporated, and it was to work with people that were on dialysis. So they had end-stage kidney disease. This was a 2-year research grant, so we actually did research on this population. And this group came in a couple times a week for about an hour and a half, and we did lots of different kinds of horticulture activities with them. This was a very difficult group to work with in the sense that they were very sick. I think every single person ended up in the hospital at some time during the research period. And we had 5 people pass away over the course of the time that we were working with them. So difficult in the sense of it being a research project. It was wonderful in the sense of working with them. You learned a lot. And for me, this was a great lesson because we also discovered, this was a research project. They came, but they weren't getting anything, they weren't getting any kind of compensation. They got to take lots of plants home and that sort of thing. But what we found out, not because the participants told us directly, but because we eventually heard it through their doctors, the attendance wasn't quite as robust as we hoped. And it turned out that many of these folks couldn't afford to get to us. They either didn't have a car, or they had a car, but not enough money to pay for the gas, or they just didn't, couldn't take the bus that day. And so, although they didn't want to tell us that ourselves, we eventually found that out, and then we were able to incorporate a gift card. So we made that part of the research project, and every time they came, we were able to put $7 on it. They could use it for lunch, they could use it for gas. We also gave them vouchers for a transportation system, and that made all the difference in the world. So that was an obstacle that we didn't even realize existed, but once we did, we could try to solve it. And so that was a good lesson for me to realize that what I might think of an obstacle may not be, or vice versa. So this was really a great group that we worked with. Let me back up here for a second. The one thing I want to say is we did actually find some interesting findings with this. We were looking at quality of life and their self-perceptions of health and their own quality of life. And we found that those participants, so we took a survey before they started the program, halfway through the program, at the end of the program, and then 3 months after they ended the program. And we found that while they were in the program, we were seeing a lot of positive changes, specifically in the area of they were feeling less like a burden on their caregiver, and they also had a little bit higher physical function. What was interesting, and I'm really glad we took that measure 3 months later, is that at that very last measure, all of the positive things had gone away. So they were back to feeling like a burden, they were back to feeling less like they were able to function physically. So that kind of, at least for this group, taught us that we really need to have some kind of an ongoing program. We also got some funding from the Paralyzed Veterans of America to work with veterans with spinal cord injury and disease. And so with this group, we were really looking at some of the physical function issues. This was not a research group, but how could we use horticulture activities to help do things like increase mobility or work on eye-hand coordination, gross fine motor skills, things like that. We also received some money from the Climb for Cancer Foundation to support a group of people affected by cancer. And in this particular group, you didn't have to be in active treatment. Maybe you had cancer in the past, maybe you even had a close loved one that had cancer. And this was really, we actually still see many of these women. And there are a few men that in the program as well. But here we were really trying to develop a community of support, to provide opportunities for self-expression, creative expression, that kind of thing, and also certainly teach some horticulture skills. In the program, one of the kind of founding concepts is that we want to really work with plants that are engaging, sensory qualities, you know, if it smells interesting, or it's fuzzy, or it has an interesting shape or color. And if we can get 2 or 3 of those things with one plant, that's even better. With our cancer group, we had to be kind of careful about that because sometimes that sense of smell can be overwhelming. So always kind of thinking about some of those things. And of course, as you can see, the woman here is wearing gloves, want to make sure that we're protecting, you know, because their immune systems are so low. We want to make sure that we're considering all of the safety issues that are part of this as well. And those safety issues are going to vary from group to group. We received some funding from the Dana and Christopher Reeve Foundation to work with people with stroke-associated paralysis. And so that group we wanted to do research in the group, but we didn't get the full funding, so we had to cut the research part out. But again, similarly, we were working on some of those physical functions as well as cognitive function skills through horticulture activities. You can see here the gentleman on the right is doing some he's putting plants into a press. He's been out in the garden, he's collected some plants, he's bringing them back, kind of cutting them up and putting them into a plant press. So you can imagine all the eye-hand coordination, gross and fine motor skills that go along with that. But for him, it doesn't feel like therapy. He's just doing a horticulture activity. So it's a lot more motivating and I think less tiring in some ways. I mentioned that we received some money from the Department of Neurology to work with people with with movement disorders. And some of the skills that we were working on here were the same kind of thing, those physical function. But in both of these groups, the cognitive function is also very important. So how can we build some chances to kind of maintain cognitive function as well? You know, maybe we make some plans, or, you know, Tom, let me know what you think about how we should do this activity. What order should we do things in? Maybe it's as simple as, you know, counting out a certain number of pots for the group, or whatever that might be, depending on the particular individual's abilities. Joy here was one of our participants in she had recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's. And I will tell you, she was angry about that. I don't blame her one bit. She was really struggling. You know, she thought, my life's coming to an end, everything's going to change, et cetera, et cetera. And when she first came into the program, she seemed angry all the time. I was surprised she was even coming. She didn't seem to be happy to be there, but she showed up every week. And we remember one time, soon after she started, we were doing a activity of taking cuttings of coleus. And so everybody had some coleus in front of them, and we were talking about how to take cuttings. And of course, that's a lot of eye-hand coordination as well, and counting down the nodes to know where to take the cut. And one of my volunteers came up to me and said, Lee, Joy is just destroying the plants. I don't know what to do. And I kind of looked over at Joy, and I could see she had this very determined look on her face, but she was just going at it. She was just giving the thing a haircut. And so I said, you know what, it's okay. Just let her do what she needs to do. You know, ask her if you can help at times. And what we realized is that she was processing. And she was processing through these plants and just needed to do whatever she needed to do. And I thought, you know what, coleus are a dime a dozen. They grow very fast. They're very easy. We're not going to put any orchids in. We will give her all the coleus she needs to kind of get through this. And for the next few weeks, that was kind of what was happening. But I will tell you, after a while, that shifted, and she was starting to slow down. She was starting to take more care in what she was doing. We actually started to see some smiles, and it was such a transformative experience, not just for her, but for all of us to see that process. And here you can see she's got a big smile on her face. She's just created this herb bowl that she's taking home with her. So that was a really great thing for all of us to be part of. We continued to work with our veterans, that first group I told you about. Unfortunately, we stopped working them when COVID hit, and we haven't had a mechanism to get them back to the greenhouse yet, but I hope that at some point we will. But these were mostly men, and none of them had jobs right now. You know, they just weren't able to hold down regular employment. But they really wanted to do things that helped around the greenhouse. So we came up with a lot of different kinds of activities that I always say they're a little bit more industrious in that sense. They were related to horticulture, but they were sort of the things behind the horticulture. So as an example, what they're working on here is a moss pole. And it's a pole that's going to go in the middle of a big pot for a vine to grow up. So, and these guys, we wanted them working together, we wanted them socializing, we wanted them problem solving and thinking about teamwork. And so this involved measuring and cutting, fastening with the zip ties, stuffing it with moss. And so they would kind of figure out how they would do this together. And it was just a really great experience because not only were they practicing a lot of those important skills just for life, but they were also doing something that these ended up getting sold at a plant sale. And so, this really made these guys feel well. And I think that's one of the things that I have found is so important about therapeutic horticulture or horticultural therapy in every group that I've worked with, is that in so many cases, these folks they don't feel like they're contributing to society for whatever reason, their disease, their disability, their circumstance. And that really kind of makes them feel bad about themselves. They just feel like they're a burden. And so anything that we can do in our program to help them feel like they are contributing is going to help increase that sense of self-worth and self-value and self-esteem. And plants inherently do that. Society values plants. They like plants. They want to pay for plants. And so if we can help the folks that come to us, help them understand that they are growing these beautiful plants that are either going to get sold at our sale, they're going to get planted out into the garden for visitors to admire, or they're going to get taken home to give as gifts or have on their own windowsill, then that starts to shift that feeling a little bit. Not only are they doing something that they love, but they're doing something that actually helps society and that society values. So that's always one of my goals. This is some more pictures of the dialysis group that I mentioned, but I have this picture in here because one of the things that's unique about our program is that we, in many cases, invite the care partners to be part of the program. And that was the case in this dialysis group. And actually, we did research on both groups separately. So we were looking at the effects on the primary participant as well as the effects on the care partner. And so that's what we're seeing, a husband and wife here. And actually, the one on the right here, this is a son and the mother-in-law. Which is kind of an unlikely combination, right? But his wife worked during the day and couldn't come. And so the mother-in-law came along, and I think they were somewhat newly married. And so these two didn't know each other very well, but it was so neat to see that relationship kind of expand over time. And what a great way for that relationship to develop. It's not about who's taking care of the house or the kids or the cars, but it's about something that's totally separate about this growing plants together. And the other thing I learned, I had assumed when we first started working with care partners that we would split them up. So they would come in, the care partners would go over here and work on an activity, the primary participants would be over here because we were trying to give them a break from each other. I could not have been more wrong. They wanted to work together because this was totally nothing to do with the diagnosis. It had nothing to do with, have you taken your medication? I heard the alarm go off. It had nothing to do with any of that stuff, the doctor's visits. It was something totally new, positive, that they enjoyed doing together. And that they could then, one of the things we always try to do is create projects that they can then take home and continue to work on from home. So that was a really great lesson for me. We've also had a couple of graduate students do their research in the greenhouse, that plant science or horticulture science students. This particular one was a group of women with no particular diagnosis. And the researcher, Christy here, the student researcher, was looking to see whether participation in these gardening activities would have any changes. She actually was looking at changes in the brain. So they did fMRI scans before the participants started, and then at the end of the program, she had a control group. So she looked at both. There were also a lot of psychometric surveys done as well. And interestingly, I kind of assumed that the things that we would see light up in the brain would be like energy and, you know, activity and that kind of stuff. But actually it was the opposite. It was the calming things that were lighting up in the brain, the stress relief stuff. So that was kind of interesting. But we also found that, so one of the things they did was every 2 weeks, was it every 1 week? Doesn't matter, but one of the surveys they did was the Beck depression inventory, which kind of measures a person's depression level within that last week. And we found that at the very beginning, several women reported pretty high levels of depression, like kind of undiagnosed, I guess it was. But within 4 sessions, those levels of depression came down, like really down. And all of them trended down. And at first we thought, okay, this is just like some weird outlier. And we, you know, took those out and manipulated the data to see, are we really getting a true picture? And sure enough, no matter how we did that, did it the right way, that was the case. And so that made us really interested in the concept of dosage. You know, how much therapeutic horticulture do you need to start feeling better? We knew from the dialysis group, at least for that group, it needed to continue to have those effects. So that just made us really interested in terms of some of those dosage questions. That led us on to another research project with the Department of Psychiatry, working with inpatients with severe depression. These folks were all in the Unit 52, it's now been moved, but what they called it, that's the ECT, the electric convulsive therapy unit. And so we were kind of trying to figure out the dosage effects. Unfortunately, although we did get this paper published, that was exciting. It was difficult because people were there for all different amounts of time, and it was kind of hard to get the data to line up well enough that we could really be comparing apples to apples. But it was a really interesting study. And we found that this program really helped a lot of these folks with severe depression. You know, again, at the beginning, we didn't see a lot of interaction, a lot of facial expression, but as they came more often, we really started to see that shift. One of the things, as I mentioned, because we rely on looking for funding to run these programs, the hardest part for me is that when the funding comes to an end, the program has to come to an end because we're out of money. And I can't tell you how hard when you see positive changes in a group of people that you have to say, sorry, this is our last session. It's really tough. In my previous horticultural therapy program in Chicago, it was a residential facility, so people could come for their lives if they wanted to. So I really struggled with this aspect, and I kept saying to the steering committee, we've got to find some funding to support those people that have been through one of our programs. And on my 3rd try, I finally got some funding from the Medical Guild at UF to create what we call our alumni group. Doesn't mean they're an alumni of UF, it means they're alumni of one of the programs that we've offered at the therapeutic horticulture program. So we continue to see this group. We realized how positive it was for them. And so the Wilmot has committed to sponsoring that program, and we do that through our plant sales and that kind of thing. So what's great about this group is that we have people with all different conditions because they were all in different groups and they come together, and it's such a close-knit group of people. It's really kind of neat to see how they've gotten to know each other over the years. But then if somebody new comes in, they're so welcoming. And this is really one of our great groups. They also are really helpful with our plants because they just want to work. So that's fun. We also got some funding to work with a group of young adults with autism. And we ran a job skills program for them. So we were trying to teach through our program some of the soft job skills, things like problem solving, appropriate communication, teamwork, some things like that. And the basic structure was that they would come do a classroom session at Wilmot where they'd learn some of the kinds of things like how to interview, you know, do mock interviews, how to kind of think about what sort of a job you want, writing resumes. And then they would come to the greenhouse, which was the mock job site, and they would practice some of those skills. These were skills that would apply to any kind of a job, not just a horticulture job. But if one of the participants showed some interest in horticulture, then we had a pathway for them. We actually had Dr. Charlie Guy, who's now a professor emeritus, could offer tutoring sessions to help them get certified by the Florida Nursery Grower and Landscape Association. We actually had 7 of these young adults get their certification in last position. So that was really exciting. A couple more. We also work with the Florida Recovery Center, working with adults and young adults in addiction recovery. And they come every other week. Actually, I'm going to see them tomorrow. And this is a fun group. We really think of the program when they come to us, not as an active therapeutic program in the sense that we're trying to do something therapeutic, but that we're a relief from them, from all the work. It's a residential program, all the work that they're doing at the center. So when they come to us, we are trying to give them a little bit of a break. But my ulterior motive is that I'm trying to get them really interested in horticulture so that they will fill their free time with something positive, it's positive distraction, and maybe even become interested in it as a job. We work with a lot of 20-somethings who may not have a career path yet. So maybe we can get them interested in that. We have the baby gators that come to us from time to time, and that's a lot of fun. It's not a regular group. They'll come on a field trip. But my goal here is to get them interested in horticulture and nature and not be afraid of nature. I always tell the story that when they come, I set them down on the carpet and give them some rules. One of the rules is not to run. The other rule is listen, when I blow my whistle, everybody stop and look at me. And then the third rule is you can touch anything you want. And we're being told not to touch anything usually. You can touch anything you want. So that's really exciting. You see them speed walking to get into the greenhouse. We also worked with a women veterans group for a while, and that was really great. I will say it was a little hard to recruit for this group. It was hard to find women veterans in this town. I know they're here, but that was a more difficult one. And then the last group I want to tell you about is one I feel very proud of. We started to work with students, University of Florida students, with stress, anxiety, depression. You may all be aware that this is an epidemic right now for college students. Both of my girls now are in high school. I was seeing it in high school. I was seeing it in middle school, just with mental health issues. This was happening before COVID, but it was certainly exacerbated by COVID. So just a lot of struggles. So I got some funding and we started up this group. It was a couple of years ago and it was a research project. And we found, well, actually, I'll tell you in a minute what we found. Before I do that, I do want to tell you a little bit about the therapeutic horticulture, what this is about. So this is a typical worksheet that I might give to my trained volunteers. I'm not going to necessarily share this with the participants themselves. I don't expect you to read this, but in this case, it's the plant pressing activity. This is the overview of the activity, the materials we need, and the general directions. It's this part in the middle that's important, and I think, I've got a blow up of it. So for every activity we do, I kind of come up with 3 primary goals or therapeutic benefits for that activity. In this case, of this plant pressing activity, I want to make sure that we're emphasizing sensory stimulation, motor skills, and social interaction. So I choose those 3 based on the group that we're working with and based on the activity that we're doing. And then within here, I provide examples for how the volunteers can help bring that out. With social interaction, maybe if nobody's talking, then maybe the volunteer can say, hey, tell me what you're going to do with those. Or, oh my gosh, that's such a beautiful flower. I didn't get any. Well, here, I'll share some with you, and things like that. How we can emphasize those motor skills if they're out there collecting plants or, laying the plants in the press. So lots of different kinds of things like that. And this engagement is what's going to elevate it from a horticulture activity to a therapeutic horticulture activity. It often happens on its own, but we can't assume that it's going to happen on its own. And we can make it even more engaging by kind of pulling out those things with the people that we work with. So just some other, we're kind of running out of time here, but I want to just show you a few other pictures of some of the things people have done. So we love to do plant pressing, and then they make these beautiful creations afterwards. The one in the upper left is actually created by one of the young men in the addictions recovery group. I just think that's so beautiful. Mm-hmm. Christmas cards, so lots of really great stuff. We work with a lot of herbs because those are very sensory. They stimulate a lot of memory. We can talk about cooking and recipes, and so that's a really great one. Learn about each other's cultures. We do a lot of work with succulents as well. Those are such amazing little plants. They've got such colors and structures and shapes. And I mean, look at the little roots there on the kalanchoe. That's just, that color is amazing. And if we don't slow down and notice some of the details, we might miss that. So it's really important that we do that. The one downside of succulents is that they grow at dinosaur time. So, but that's okay, because that provides an opportunity for us to work on patience and anticipation. We do a lot of kind of crafty activities, kokedama, which is the Japanese moss ball, or we'll make these succulent pumpkins or terrariums. Actually today, when I leave here, we're gonna do a terrarium activity. We do plant poundings where we take the actual leaves and flowers and we pound the pigment out onto fabric. That's a lot of fun. It's good when you're feeling a little tension, but do it outside, not do it inside. It's really loud. Some beautiful things that people have created from there. It's gorgeous. So somebody did one, it was a little more watercolory when the plant pigment came out. So she grabbed a pen and kind of created a picture here. So the last thing I wanted to tell you about was this student program I just started to tell you about. As I said, I got funding. This was a research project, and we were looking to see whether therapeutic horticulture would help students with stress, anxiety, depression, if that would improve any of those conditions. So we got our IRB approval. We started to recruit. These were some of our recruitment flyers. And really and we were working with the Counseling and Wellness Center at UF. They both referred people to us, and we had a partnership where they would come over and participate in our sessions. So basically we had a very structured and consistent format, and these students would come, they would to take some surveys before they started the program, and then after their 8th session. So for some students, that might be 8 weeks later. For others, it might be 12 weeks later if they didn't come consistently. So we're looking at the number of times they actually participated over a semester. So we would have a wellness strategy associated with every session. And that was often taught by somebody coming from a psychologist or a counselor from the wellness center. Sometimes we would deliver it ourselves. Then there would be a horticulture activity associated with that wellness strategy. And then the session continuity was really important to us as well, that we had the same structure each time. So we found, and I'm working on writing this up, so I'm hoping I can get it published soon, that those students that participated in 7 or more therapeutic horticulture sessions had statistically significant decrease in stress, and in anxiety, both state anxiety as well as trait anxiety. And we also found that they had a statistically significant increase in general resilience, and perhaps even more importantly, academic resilience. And this particular academic resilience scale has 3 subscales associated with it. I thought I had them. Help-seeking behavior, ability to manage negative affect. That's what was the third. And I'm forgetting, but all 3 of them we saw an increase in that as well, which was all in positive direction. So that was amazing. And we had 3 semesters of that research project. I am trying so hard to get University of Florida to fund this program. I mean, why would they not want to? If it's increasing students' mental health and it's increasing academic resilience, it's not very expensive, but so far I have not found that magic button yet. But I'm working on it because we can see the value in this. And we heard every day from these students, this is my lifeline, because they're supporting each other, they're learning wellness strategies. Our goal was for them to be confident about growing plants so they could continue to do it on their own, and also to recognize the role that plants and nature play in their personal wellness. So I actually put in a grant for a multi-site study. We do one at University of Tennessee, still at University of Florida, and at Brigham Young in Idaho. So fingers crossed we get that grant. Yes, there's one in Utah. Isn't that interesting? It's not the main campus, of course. So last thing we mentioned an undergraduate certificate in horticultural therapy. This is available both for traditional students as well as what we call non-degree students. It's an online program, and I have students from all over the world. It's really cool because we're getting all these perspectives from, China and South Africa and Trinidad and Tobago, all over the place, and they all different ages and levels of profession and different kinds of professions. It's really a neat community. So that's been really exciting to teach as well. And I think that's all I have for you. There's more info on the gardens and the certificate program. And is there time for questions?
Julianne, do we have another microphone here?
No,
I could repeat the question.
Thank
That's
you.
okay.
Don't.
Oh, okay, public schools, K-12. Most of your participants here are adults or postgraduate, public schools. Do they have any interaction with you, any opportunities for guidance counselors or exceptional child department to refer students for this kind of an experience?
Yeah, so the question was, do we have any contact with public schools, school-age children, guidance counselors, teachers there? And we currently at Wilmot do not have any kind of a direct relationship like that. There are a lot of schools in the Gainesville area and really across the country that have school gardens. Master gardeners are often involved in those. And while I think there is absolutely a therapeutic component to those gardens, I think they're mostly there for the kids to learn science and math and some of those kinds of things, but just getting them outdoors and interacting with nature can be positive. There are some programs for school-age children, absolutely, that, maybe with behavioral issues or autism or some of the developmental disabilities. I actually worked on one when I was in high school as a high school volunteer. So there are some wonderful benefits. We just right now don't have that connection. And for us, we actually tried to start a high school program for high school kids with developmental disabilities. And we found that the issue was the transportation, getting them to us. Usually groups come to us, but there have been a couple of situations where we've gone out. We were working with the psychiatric hospital and we would go out there once a week and bring our programming to them. So that might be something we need to look at in the future with school programs to see if we can kind of come to them, because I think that would solve obviously those transportation issues. Yeah.
If you're just a regular patient at Shannon with a regular family, not in a subgroup, how would you know about Wilmot Gardens? Are there posters or flyers or something over there?
Yeah, the question was, how would you know about the groups in Wilmot Gardens if you were part of one of these existing groups? And, that's been one of the things that we've had to work hard on. It's surprising how few people know about Wilmot Gardens, but even students on campus, because we're at the south end of campus. Most of the students are, on main campus. So particularly for our groups, we do recruit. Sometimes if it's a very specialized group, we might recruit through doctor's offices or, targeted recruitment that way. For our student group, for example, we used social media, we used flyers all over campus. We posted on the calendar of the Wellness Center. So it kind of depends on the particular group. Right now, we don't have any groups for just the general public to join. And this is a funding issue. We always have to look for that targeted funding. But the greenhouse is always open for people to visit. So at least they can benefit that way. We do have a lot of volunteer opportunities, so we can always propose those. But one of my goals is to be able to have maybe periodic kind of drop-in sessions where we can widely advertise them and anybody and everybody could come. But right now our groups are pretty targeted.
I just wanted to comment on it. There is a program in the schools called the Junior Master Gardener Program, which hits a lot of schools, and they have gardens and classroom activities.
Yeah, that's a great program. And they've done some research on some of those as well. They've actually found that parents of kids that involved in school gardens, that there's a lot of benefit to the family relationship, even outside of the garden. So I think that's really, and that oftentimes those parents will become more involved in the educational programs for, homework and stuff like that, reading for the child too. So yeah, they're really positive. We also know that kids that grow vegetables are more likely to eat them. And then that goes on for lifelong. I actually read some research that said kids that forage when they're young, collect beetles or collect rocks are much more likely to be environmental stewards as adults. So that's really important too. So getting kids involved with nature is so important on so many different levels.
When I came to the university in 1962, Wilmot Gardens was a very, very popular venue for funerals. I think that many people felt it was a therapeutic to be outdoors in that setting. And I wondered if that still is the case. Is it a venue for funerals?
Well, the question was, when he was at the university, it was often used for funerals, and that's the first I've ever heard of that. I've heard a lot about it being used for weddings, and we still do weddings there. Actually, one of our longtime volunteers was married in the gardens. But not since I've been there, has there been any kind of a funeral service. I'll have to ask Dr. Tischer about that. Because that's I can understand that. I definitely can, but yeah, I'm glad you told me that. I'll have to see if we can find any history on that.
Other question.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I will see you guys, those of you going to the tour next week, so you'll get a chance to come to the garden. I'll see you out there. Okay. Thank you.